The deafening echo of Karen's shrill scream reverberated through the grand marble halls of the prestigious art museum. Startled visitors turned their heads in unison, gaping at the spectacle unfolding before them. Karen, her face flushed with rage, stood in the center of the gallery, arms flailing as she unleashed a tirade against the hapless security guard. "How dare you tell me I can't take pictures here?" she shrieked, her voice dripping with unbridled entitlement. "Don't you know who I am? I'll have your job for this." The security guard, a seasoned professional who had seen his fair share of unruly patrons, remained remarkably calm. With a steady tone, he explained that the museum's policies strictly prohibited photography to preserve the artwork's integrity. But Karen was having none of it. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," she spat, drawing the attention of the growing crowd. "I paid good money to be here, and I'll do whatever I please." As the argument escalated, onlookers began to whisper and murmur among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief at Karen's audacious behavior. The tranquil atmosphere of the museum had been shattered, replaced by a palpable tension that hung in the air. Suddenly, a young woman emerged from the crowd, her eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. Slowly, she approached Karen, who was still in the throes of her tirade, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Excuse me, ma'am," the woman said, her voice calm and measured. "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion with the security guard. Perhaps I can offer a solution that would benefit everyone." Karen paused, her brow furrowed, as she regarded the stranger with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "And what might that be?" she asked, her tone still laced with indignation. The woman's lips curled into a sly smile. "Well, you see, I happen to be an artist in residence here at the museum, and I've been searching for the perfect subject to feature in my latest performance piece. Your public display of emotion has given me an idea." Karen's eyes widened, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. "A performance piece," she echoed, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Precisely," the woman replied. "I believe your, shall we say, passionate reaction to the museum's policies would make for a fascinating work of art. What do you say, Karen? Would you be willing to lend your talents to my latest masterpiece?" The story continues in part 2. Karen stared at the young woman, her mouth agape, unsure of how to respond. The security guard, sensing an opportunity to defuse the situation, seized the moment. "Ma'am, if you agree to participate in this performance piece, I'll be happy to overlook your previous outburst," he said, his voice laced with a hint of desperation. "It would be in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter amicably." Karen considered the proposal, her mind racing. On one hand, she was outraged at the very idea of being turned into some sort of art exhibit. But on the other, the prospect of avoiding any potential consequences for her actions was undeniably appealing. "Fine," she huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "But this better be worth my time." The young woman's face lit up with a triumphant grin. "Excellent. I assure you, Karen, this will be an experience you'll never forget." With that, she gestured for Karen to follow her, leading the reluctant participant deeper into the museum. The security guard breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that the situation had been resolved without further incident. As they wove through the maze of galleries, Karen couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The woman's confident demeanor and the mischievous glint in her eye only served to heighten Karen's apprehension. What had she gotten herself into? Finally, they arrived at a secluded corner of the museum, a space that had been converted into a makeshift studio. Canvases, paints, and various other art supplies were neatly arranged, and a large, empty platform stood in the center of the room. "Welcome to my workspace," the woman announced, her arms sweeping across the room with a flourish. "Now, Karen, if you would be so kind as to take your place on the platform, we can begin." Karen hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. "Begin what exactly?" she asked, her voice laced with trepidation. The woman's grin widened. Why? Your performance, of course. I want you to channel that beautiful outburst of yours and bring it to life on this stage. Let the world see the true you, Karen. Reluctantly, Karen stepped onto the platform, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman quickly began to arrange the various art supplies around her, her movements precise and deliberate. Now, Karen, she said, her tone suddenly serious. I want you to imagine that you're back in that gallery, facing off against the security guard. I want you to feel the rage, the indignation, the sense of entitlement. Let it consume you, and then let it out. Karen swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into, but it was too late to back out now. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself for what was to come. The story continues in part 3. Karen stood on the platform, her heart pounding in her chest. The young woman, who had introduced herself as Olivia, the artist in residence, moved around her with purpose, arranging various art supplies and setting up a camera. All right, Karen, Olivia said, her voice calm and measured. I want you to close your eyes and transport yourself back to that moment in the gallery. Feel the rage coursing through your veins, the indignation burning in your chest. Let it all out, but this time, channel it into your performance. Karen hesitated, her brow furrowed in uncertainty. And what exactly am I supposed to do? She asked, her voice betraying a hint of apprehension. Olivia's lips curved into a sly smile. Anything you want, she replied. Scream, curse, gesticulate wildly. Whatever feels natural. Just let your emotions guide you. Taking a deep breath, Karen closed her eyes and tried to conjure up the memory of her outburst in the gallery. The security guard's calm demeanor, the whispers of the onlookers, the sheer audacity of being told she couldn't take pictures. It all came rushing back, igniting a spark of anger within her. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open, and she unleashed a primal scream that echoed through the small studio. Her arms flailed, her body twisting and contorting as she channeled the rage that had consumed her earlier. Olivia watched, her eyes alight with fascination, as she captured the performance on camera. Karen's tirade seemed to go on forever, her voice growing hoarse as she exhausted herself. Finally, she collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Olivia lowered the camera, a triumphant grin spreading across her face. Bravo, Karen, she exclaimed. That was absolutely magnificent. You've given me the perfect material to work with. Karen lifted her head, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. What do you mean? She asked, her voice ragged. Why? Your performance, of course, Olivia replied, her tone brimming with excitement. I'm going to turn this into a piece that will truly capture the essence of entitlement and privilege. It's going to be a masterpiece. Karen's eyes widened, and a wave of dread washed over her. You can't be serious, she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's smile only grew wider. Oh, but I am, Karen. This is going to be the talk of the art world. And you, my dear, are the star of the show. The story continues in part 4. Karen stared at Olivia, her mind reeling. She had agreed to participate in this performance piece to avoid any consequences for her outburst, but the reality of the situation was far more sinister than she had anticipated. You can't do this, she stammered, her voice laced with panic. I never agreed to be the center of some art exhibit. Olivia's expression remained calm and collected, her eyes shining with a hint of amusement. But you did, Karen, she said, her tone almost soothing. You agreed to be a part of my project, and I intend to see it through. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Olivia held up a hand, silencing her. Listen, Karen, she continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. You have to understand. Your outburst in the gallery was an extraordinary display of human emotion. The way you wielded your sense of entitlement, the way you lashed out at the security guard, it was captivating, to say the least. She paused, her gaze piercing through Karen. As an artist, I live for moments like these. Moments that capture the raw, unfiltered essence of the human experience. And I'm going to immortalize yours in a way that will leave a lasting impact on the art world." Karen shook her head, her mind racing. "But why me?" she asked, her voice laced with desperation. "There are plenty of other entitled, privileged people out there. Why did you have to choose me?" Olivia chuckled, a hint of condescension in her voice. "Because, my dear Karen, you are the perfect embodiment of the very thing I aim to critique. Your behavior in the gallery was a textbook example of the kind of entitled, self-centered mindset that I find so fascinating." She paused, her lips curving into a smile. "Besides, you agreed to be a part of this. You can't back out now." Karen felt her heart sink, the realization dawning on her that she was trapped. She had walked straight into Olivia's trap, and now she was at the mercy of the artist's vision. "What are you going to do with me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's smile widened. "Oh, you'll see," she said, her tone dripping with excitement. "This is just the beginning, Karen. The show is just getting started." The story continues in part 5. The days that followed were a blur for Karen. Olivia had taken her under her wing, orchestrating a series of performances that were designed to capture the essence of Karen's entitled behavior. From stage arguments with museum staff to elaborate displays of consumerism, Karen found herself thrust into situations that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Throughout it all, Olivia remained an ever-present force, guiding Karen and manipulating the narrative to suit her artistic vision. Karen felt like a puppet, her strings pulled by the relentless artist who seemed determined to expose her flaws to the world. Finally, the day of the big unveiling arrived. Olivia had curated a special exhibition at the museum, and Karen was the centerpiece. As she stood in the dimly lit gallery, surrounded by the various installations and multimedia displays, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The crowd began to filter in, chattering excitedly as they made their way through the exhibit. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for the moment when her own performance would be revealed. Suddenly, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated the platform where Karen had first unleashed her outburst. A hush fell over the crowd as Olivia stepped forward, a triumphant smile on her face. "Welcome, everyone, to the entitled exhibit," she announced, her voice carrying through the gallery. "Here, we explore the fascinating and often troubling phenomenon of societal privilege and entitlement." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "And at the heart of this exhibit is our star performer, Karen." At the mention of her name, Karen felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She wanted to run, to hide, to somehow escape this nightmare she had found herself in. But Olivia's grip on her was ironclad, and she knew there was no way out. As Olivia began to describe the various installations and performances, Karen's eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of the audience. Some looked amused, others appeared genuinely intrigued by the display. But there was one emotion that seemed to be universally present, a sense of judgment. Karen felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly powerless. She had never imagined that her moment of rage in the gallery would lead to this, a public spectacle that laid bare her deepest flaws and insecurities for all to see. The story continues in part 6. As Olivia's presentation continued, Karen's discomfort only grew. The audience, once quietly intrigued, began to murmur and shift in their seats, their expressions shifting from fascination to something far more unsettling. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the gallery rang out, cutting through the chatter. "This is sick. How dare you exploit this woman for your own selfish gain?" Karen's head snapped in the direction of the outburst, her eyes widening as she recognized the speaker. It was the security guard from the initial incident. He was striding toward the platform, his face contorted with anger. "This woman has done nothing wrong," he continued, his voice rising in volume. "She's just another victim of your twisted art project." Olivia's composure faltered for a moment but she quickly regained her footing. "Sir, I understand your concern, but this piece is a commentary on the very issues you're addressing," she said, her tone measured. "Commentary?" The security guard scoffed. "This is nothing more than a cruel spectacle. You're humiliating this woman for your own entertainment." The crowd erupted into a chorus of murmurs and shouts, some voicing their agreement with the security guard, others defending Olivia's artistic vision. Karen felt as if she were caught in the eye of a hurricane, the weight of 1,000 judgmental stares bearing down on her. Suddenly, a woman in the front row stood up, her face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous," she cried. "How dare you turn this woman's personal struggles into some kind of twisted performance?" More voices joined the fray, and soon the gallery was alive with a cacophony of debate and outrage. Olivia tried in vain to regain control of the situation, but the tide had turned against her. Karen stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never anticipated that her moment of weakness would become the subject of such intense scrutiny and criticism. The thought of being the center of this spectacle was overwhelming, and she felt a swell of panic rising within her. As the chaos continued to unfold around her, Karen made a split-second decision. Mustering every ounce of courage she could muster, she stepped off the platform and fled the gallery, the sounds of the angry crowd echoing in her ears. The story continues in Part 7. Karen's heart raced as she burst through the museum's grand entrance, the cool night air hitting her face like a slap. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her keys. Once behind the wheel, Karen allowed herself a moment to catch her breath, her mind reeling from the events that had just unfolded. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, so utterly powerless. As the adrenaline began to subside, a new emotion began to take hold: shame. Karen couldn't believe that her momentary lapse of judgment had been turned into a public spectacle, a performance piece that had elicited such intense criticism and backlash. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. The sound of her phone ringing jolted her from her thoughts. Glancing down at the screen, she saw that it was her husband, John, no doubt calling to check on her. Taking a deep breath, she answered the call. "Karen, what's going on?" John's voice was laced with concern. "I just saw a video of you causing a scene at the museum. What happened?" Karen felt her heart sink. The news had clearly traveled fast, and she knew she couldn't hide the truth from her husband any longer. It's a long story, John," she said, her voice trembling. "I was approached by this artist, and she convinced me to participate in some kind of performance piece. But it all went horribly wrong, and now I'm the center of this huge controversy." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and Karen could almost feel the weight of John's disappointment. "Karen, you know how I feel about your sense of entitlement," he said, his tone stern. "I thought we'd moved past that, but this is a whole new level of embarrassment." Karen felt the sting of tears in her eyes as John continued, his voice laced with frustration. "Do you have any idea how this is going to affect our family, our business, the damage you've done to our reputation?" The story continues in Part 8. As John's words sank in, Karen felt a wave of guilt and regret wash over her. She had never imagined that her moment of entitlement and rage would have such far-reaching consequences, not just for her, but for her entire family. "I'm so sorry, John," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just so angry, and I let my emotions get the better of me." John let out a heavy sigh. "That's the problem, Karen. You constantly let your emotions and sense of entitlement dictate your actions, without any regard for the consequences." He paused, and Karen could almost hear the disappointment in his voice. "This stunt of yours has put our family in a very precarious position. You've embarrassed us, tarnished our reputation, and now I have to clean up the mess you've made." Karen felt her heart sink. She knew that John was right. Her behavior had been completely out of line, and the fallout was going to be severe. She had let her sense of privilege blind her to the reality of the situation, and now she was facing the consequences. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice laced with shame. "I never wanted to hurt you or our family." "Well, it's too late for that now," John replied, his tone harsh. "You're going to have to live with the consequences of your actions, Karen. And I'm not sure I can continue to stand by you after this." Karen felt the weight of his words like a physical blow. The thought of losing John, the one person who had always been there for her, was almost too much to bear. "Please, John," she begged, the tears streaming down her face. "I'll do anything to make this right. I'll make a public apology. I'll donate to charity. I'll do whatever it takes to make this up to you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Karen held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sorry, Karen," John finally said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I think it's best if you stay away from the house for a while. I need some time to think about all of this." With that, the line went dead, leaving Karen alone in her car, her world crumbling around her. As the reality of her situation sank in, Karen felt a profound sense of remorse and shame. She had let her sense of entitlement blind her to the consequences of her actions, and now she was paying the price. The performance piece that had started as a fleeting moment of anger had spiraled into a full-blown personal and professional disaster, one that threatened to tear her life apart. Karen knew that she had only herself to blame. She had learned a hard lesson of the consequences of her entitled behavior, and she was determined to make things right, no matter what it took. But as she sat in her car, staring into the darkness, she couldn't help but wonder if the damage she had done would ever truly be repaired. The end.